Welcome to the HUI with Hoka podcast. Take number 2, but no one else needs to know that.
Oh man, kia ora everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Bill, to the HUI with Hoka podcast, episode 27. It is Saturday, the 27th of April, 2025. We're here at the beautiful art studio. Well, I was about to say my beautiful art studio, but I'm just subletting. I'm very grateful. I'm fortunate to have this in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton, New Zealand. Today I'm here with Mr. William Smart.
Thank you very much.
Bill. He is, for the people who don't know, Bill is a combat sports specialist, performance scientist, and SNC mastermind. But none of this would be possible without Timothy Stevens from Adapt Media, Behind the Lens, and Ben Anthony Wilson.
Thank you, guys.
Both mixed media artists who support us with, this platform. So shout out to you boys. Thank you so much for being here today and getting this show on the road. But yeah, I'm gonna give a little summary, a little about who you are and what you do, Bill.
Cool.
So you have had different roles, and you're still currently working with High Performance New Zealand. That sounds pretty glamorous, doesn't it? Wow. I mean, I always have to think about, when we started working together in the SNC strength and conditioning space, and you charged me $20 an hour cash. It's a bit different to working now with High Performance New Zealand. You work with the Olympic rowing and cycling team, with Boxing New Zealand, and you work with a lot of different athletes in the amateur and pro ranks in the mixed martial arts, which most people affiliate with, like the UFC is the most dominant and prominent one. But so many other different promotions like Shuriken here in New Zealand, and the list goes on and on. Like I said, on the pro level, amateur level, and across the board. We spoke first 2 years ago on an episode, and I'm assuming from that point to now, a lot has changed. So what has changed, Mr. William Smart?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for the awesome introduction.
Well,
I just made a joke before, not that this is take 2 or anything, about if you follow WWE, John Cena winning his 17th world title, comes on to the next show the next day, SmackDown, and gets announced by the ring announcer, and walks up to him afterwards and hands him a piece of paper and tells him, sorry, can you redo that? And he reads out and the greatest of all time. It was hilarious. Anyways.
No, I just remember even when you had your boxing fight, you walked out to
John Cena. Oh, mate. I remember when, as soon as the music hit, I lost my shit. It was so cool. This was
and you
so.
did get a little bit distracted too for that boxing fight. You're in the crowd, high-fiving people, and I remember I pushed you back, said, "Fucking go!"
It was the John Cena. Seriously.
You gotta focus. Oh man.
Oh shit.
It is all good. I mean, that was even before we did the last episode, which was, like I said, pretty much almost 2 years ago. I think it was in May 2 years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess a lot has changed. In terms of high performance sports stuff, there's, you sort of generally cycle through various different roles. So in terms of that, small changes to roles, but nothing's too different. I currently work with the Olympic endurance cycling team as the sort of lead S&C for that, being the Olympic team silver medal winners at Paris Olympics, which is cool. Worked with the sprint cycling team as well, which is silver and gold medalists at the last Olympics, and worked with the New Zealand BMX team as well through that. So that's probably been the biggest ones, and then sort of filtered out of rowing about, I want to say, the start of 2024. So that was sort of the transition from that. So similar, but I guess different changes in that area. Mm-hmm. On the combat sports side of things, it's probably been the biggest change. I think if you know me, I've always worked within the combat sports space alongside all my work with high performance sport. And it was sort of always the idea was, like I wanted to perform highly in that space because I've always been passionate about combat sports, and I've always been someone who wants to make meaningful change when it comes to the industry itself and sort of a lot of the practices and protocols for those athletes. So I think I've probably been doing combat sports for over 10 years now, like in conjunction with this. And I think for most, it probably has come across as something that I've done, as a hobby on the side, but it's always been, for me, one of my biggest focus points. And the HBSNZ stuff has always been about doing the best I can and upskilling in the best possible ways, basically just to become a more capable performance coach. Mm-hmm. So it's been interesting, and sort of where that's led was about just over a year ago. I was in my garage doing a training session, and checked my phone. There was a WhatsApp group with Eugene Behrman, and that was so he's the City Kickboxing head coach. And that was set up through a guy that I know called Mark, who's the high performance director of the New Zealand boxing program, because I'd worked with New Zealand boxing, been overseas a couple of times with them the year before, and essentially they were interested in, I think they had acknowledged that there were a couple of shortcomings in terms of their program and what that was resulting in, and Eugene was interested in trying to find some solutions to some of those problems. Some of those problems being in terms of athlete burnout, injuries, maximizing things like power. So there was a few short straws there that they wanted to work on. So I'm in my garage one day, see this WhatsApp message. I'm like, oh shit, okay. Go and catch up with Eugene. Maybe a couple of weeks after that, I think it was overseas at the time, just have a chat to him, and what we did from there was we looked at basically overhauling their training system. So when we looked at the training system initially, I went and had a chat to him. What do you guys need out of this? What are what are the primary concerns or established work ons that you see now, and what do you want? So from that, we had those discussions, and we outlined, okay, this is what the process looks like into a fight. And what we saw was there was a big emphasis on, and this is quite common, especially for combat sports, especially for local-based combat sports, there was a large emphasis on the workload, like a lot of grind, a lot of high volume, and a lot of training sessions, which is for MMA very important. But the way that you package it makes a big difference in terms of what you get out of each one and how they relate together. So when we first looked over it, we basically tried to put a rating on each session in terms of, well, what's the intensity of this session? Like, what would you rate this sort of out of 10? And then from there we looked at categorizing, okay, this is a red session, yellow session, green session. And basically what we saw was there was 1 to 3 red sessions 7 days a week. And for me that was a big red flag. So what we did from a schedule perspective is we looked at the training schedule and we tried to redistribute the training sessions in a way that aligns that had more of an emphasis around undulating some of those intensities. So there's more, this day is more of a red day, this day is more of an orange day. But there's also some days where we have the ability to lower those intensities. Maybe it's more of a green or a yellow. So that was kind of first, but even then, there's a lot going on in that schedule. So we kind of looked at, you wanna?
No, I was just about to say, let's pause here for a second. We're just going to sum this up a little bit, because you are the specialist, you're the expert, but for the audience, I would like to give some more digestible portions here, just to sum it up quickly. So first and foremost, you've got all the background and degrees and everything that goes with it. For someone who wants to like dive into this, can listen to the first episode. But what I'm trying to say is, the main field, generally spoken, because mixed martial arts is such a new, still such a raw sport that is developing super fast. Not just in New Zealand, in the world, but New Zealand, you know, it's moving a little slower from my understanding and from my, you know, how I look at it. Long story short though, high performance, strength and conditioning, that is the main expertise field. But then because you're so devoted and passionate about mixed martial arts, you then created this niche expertise field as well, which, I mean, essentially you're a combat sports specialist. You looked at combat sports and exactly what you just described reoccurred, not just at City Kickboxing, most likely in all the other gyms as well. You know, it's very old school training methods of like you hit the bags until your knuckles would bleed, you would run hills. No one knew why, and no one had like a scientific approach to it. And then I even remember, and just to give like on a personal note, when you came in to bring in your program at Core Mixed Martial Arts beforehand, because you are based out here in Hamilton, people were like questioning it a little bit. It's like, oh, like we're not doing all this performance stuff to like how is this, basically asking how is this helping us with fighting in whatever form or shape, you know, how is this helping me with Muay Thai, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, or mixed martial arts, you know. So it took a while for like people to latch on to understand how important those performance sessions are to actually benefit them in the cage, in the ring, on the jiu-jitsu mat, you know, because you also had jiu-jitsu competitors, you know, training them up, you know, like all these different fields. Then the boxers came into the field, and because of all the work that you've been doing in the past, then this person, Mark, shout out to Mark, thank you Mark, put you into this group because he saw that, you know, the City Kickboxing, because if you look at it in New Zealand, City Kickboxing, they have the highest percentage of people like competing on the biggest stage, which is the UFC and other big promotions. You know, they have world champion contenders, you say, about to like fight for world titles and whatnot. So yeah, just to give like an overarching like little summary for the people who maybe don't know, and where you come from and where New Zealand is at as we speak, because it's still like developing and people are like, okay, bringing this in, like how does that work? Fast forward, I think working with the likes of Israel Adesanya now, Kai Kara France, Carlos Ulberg, list goes on. That's like the cream of the crop, but still there's a lot of potential there to tap into, because you said this work started only a year ago-ish and is still building, and they have to understand now your methods, data, science. I mean, you say this sometimes with, I have to crunch numbers, but there's a lot of data analytics going into it, but maybe you want to speak on that too. So just little summary here. I'll let you get back to, you know, when you came to Eugene and to the group to present your ideas. Like you looked at the training, there was too much in the red zone, they were burning out, they were getting injured, they were maybe not performing at their best, so they brought in the specialist, and here you are. So how did your work continue from there?
Yeah, so probably one of the big things initially, once we had identified these areas of work, and for me it was, well, I want to understand what this is resulting in more. So what we had discussed was putting together quite a comprehensive testing protocol. So a testing protocol essentially was looking at strength and power measures as well as conditioning-based measures. So we're talking like a reasonably comprehensive physiological testing battery, and we integrated that into the program itself. So we had specific time periods where we were implementing that testing, and the goal initially was just to start collecting information, just to get a gauge of where everyone sits relative to each other initially. The build on from that was had the opportunity to work with Gavin Pratt from the UFC for a little bit. He helped a lot with establishing some of the normative data. So a lot of the testing that we initially set up was inspired by the current testing that the UFC are doing. As soon as we had that information, we're able to make more informed decisions around some of the changes that we're making. So that was probably one of the biggest things, I think, in terms of shedding light on what is currently the result of training, and being able to look at that and think, well, what do we want?
Because workload as well, you said, and it's really good to have that visual reference, because even, like if I would ask Tim or Ben, if you have like all red means, if you look at a traffic light, means, ooh, I need to stop, it's high workload. Yellow and maybe green or whatever colors you use give you an indication of, I mean, it's not a secret if you in the performance realm, I guess they sometimes use like a car that you can't push the pedal to the floor 24/7, otherwise you run out of fuel, it's not good for, you have to be preventative with your maintenance and whatnot. So you looked at the sessions and say, okay, we need to mix this up a little bit, injury rate, and because long story short, if you play rugby every weekend, for example, it's a different training required to, like, at the peak performance for a mixed martial artist that competes in the UFC, for example, or in any other big promotion. If you want to be a professional that succeeds, how often do they compete? A year? 3, maybe 4 times at their absolute max. Is that correct?
For which sport, sorry?
Mixed martial arts?
Yeah, that's generally about right, depending on the competition level. Lower competition levels, more
higher?
Competitions, yeah. Less, like, as soon as you start to get into professionals and then UFC, maybe you're fighting 3-4 times a year.
Would you maybe then speak on, because you have to have a baseline. So let's say you look at the program, you sit down with Eugene and the team, and you're like, all right, this is what you guys currently doing, this is what I'm suggesting, this is the direction we should be taking. However, we need to do some testing. We need to have something, we have to have a status quo on where is athlete A, B, C sitting. Can you, for the average Joe, maybe explain a little bit how that looks like? Like, what are the tests that you're doing to make sure you've got all the data that you need to then start building a program to help them succeed with getting to a title fight, winning their next fight, or like having a career path?
I'll give you a breakdown of the testing that we do with the UFC athletes, and then we can translate that into what that sort of means for other people. But essentially, we have 2 primary energy system tests that we do. So what we're looking at is, when it comes to conditioning, you've got your primary energy systems, and then off that there are sub-metrics that we look at in terms of what are the different qualities of those energy systems. So one of them, we do an incremental step test on a assault bike, which is basically like a VO2 max test. The way that we do that is we essentially have set workloads per 1 minute, and then the athlete goes up. It's kind of similar to if you were to think about doing something like a yo-yo test, where you're getting to a point where speed goes up, and then you get to a point where you hit exhaustion. Based on that, it gives us an idea of what are your aerobic capabilities like. And then for us, we use something called NEARS, we use a product called Train Red, and that is used to essentially look at the muscle oxygen utilization of the athlete. That gives me an idea of the muscle function, as well as a heart rate monitor, which gives me an idea of the cardiac function. We use those 2, and the next test is a 60-second assault bike glycolytic capacity test. So these are both from the UFC. This is from the UFC specifically. The assault bike aerobic is as well, but that's more general. The 60-second test is essentially max effort from start to finish. So it's a pretty rough test. What we get an idea of is your glycolytic energy system is the energy system that provides more immediate, short-term to moderate-term energy. So what we're trying to see is how much energy can you produce initially, and that comes through as power on the watt bike. We measure the power through the entire test, on the assault bike. How long can you sustain that for? What's the drop-off look like? So we look at, well, what's the power over 1 minute? What's your average power? And then what's your average power in the first 30 seconds versus the second 30 seconds. Gives me an idea around what kind of profile you have as an athlete. But just as important on that, we use the muscle sensors, we can have a look at how efficient you are at utilizing oxygen, how efficient you are at recovering oxygen. And we do the same in terms of viewing the trend for the heart rates. How efficient is your heart rate, is your heart? How efficient are you at supplying oxygen? How efficient are you at recovering through that system? So even for the 60-second test, what we're looking at is anaerobic power, anaerobic sustainable power, but we're also primarily looking at within an anaerobic environment, how does your aerobic system operate? How do your muscles recover and how does your heart recover? Because I think traditionally you would just look at power, but when it comes to MMA, is it more important to produce more power over X time period, or is it more important to recover that so then you can do it again? And for me, that's probably been the most important part.
Wow, can you tell that he's a specialist?
Yeah, something broke out to me.
I was trying to figure out, like, how long can I sit on this bike until I would shit myself, basically, you know? But it's maximum, like, I understand a little bit more about it to a degree, you know, because, you know, with friends, you're telling me things about it, you know, and I'm always inquisitive, you know, I want to learn, but I guess the main thing is to just pick up on the fact and how the complexity, you know, how many different areas to look at, you know, like, because then it's not just having the bike test or having a power test or jump. You are then taking all of this, putting it together and creating a program that then works.
Yeah, I think and that's not all the metrics that we take from those tests either. There's definitely quite a few. Like the idea behind it is that every metric that we collect. So a metric is essentially what are we measuring within a test, and every metric needs to relate to a specific variable, and that variable needs to relate to something specifically in training. So when I have the ability to do that, and I have the ability to essentially dissect these different areas of conditioning for this component, what I can then do is I can then, provided I have adequate data to compare to, I can then very accurately prescribe training based on the limitations in terms of those profiles. I think the thing that's important, and sometimes, you know, it comes across as a lot, what you see with people who have deficits as trends exists, whether or not it's trends in terms of their heart, their cardiac system, whether or not it's trends in terms of the muscular system. I want to see trends across all the information, because when I see trends, my confidence in that information is much higher. So as single metrics to utilize to make change, I need to be very sure that one metric is very sound in terms of reliability and validity. But when I have multiple data points telling me the same thing, my confidence in change in terms of training change or using that information to guide training is very high.
Yes. So
that's just conditioning. Mm-hmm. Basically, at the end of that process, you get a good gauge on traditionally when it comes to energy system or conditioning profiling, you're looking at, well, anaerobic versus aerobic, a more aerobic, a more anaerobic. The goal of this process is, well, when you push that to the next stage in terms of the underlying qualities of these systems, where do you sit? And then we can come back to, okay, we need more aerobic based training. We have a deficit in the aerobic system.
Mm-hmm. So it's per athlete, you would look at the trends, and obviously if it's working out, you see like a positive trend, that means you're working in the right direction, that means the program is working, that means they're more efficient, they have better output,
yes,
perform better.
Yes and no.
Okay. Correct me.
So the important part with testing, and this is probably something that gets overlooked, is, well, one, as an athlete, traditionally testing is looked at as this thing that I just want to be better at every time I do it, and that's not necessarily possible. It's not possible in the long term, and it shouldn't be the case either. I think when you look at a lot of the data from athletes in preparation for, say, major events like an Olympics over a time period, like what you'll see is you'll never see a linear trend in terms of data. So in other words, you'll never see an athlete continue to get better. It's just not. It's not a path to peak performance.
Yes, because you can only sustain the peak for a short period of time. So it's like building up, then it's dropping down.
100%. So you're going to see shifts. Some things will go down and some things will go up. I think when it comes to physical qualities, everything operates like a seesaw, right? Like when I gain, say, anaerobic conditioning, maybe I lose a little bit in terms of aerobic conditioning. So there's always like it's a sliding scale in terms of when I improve my power, maybe strength starts to go down. So there's always a sliding scale. So it's all about trying to look at what we need at a specific time, and then if we have the ability to map out where we should be on the way, then we can have more confidence that we're moving in the right direction. So that's essentially the goal of the testing. But with that in mind, for the MMA athletes, we set very specific time frames for testing. So off-camp testing happens at a specific weeks out, so does camp testing. So there's 2 testings that we do in camp, 2 testings off camp. And doesn't always happen in reality, but the idea is they always should happen at the same times. And then we start to create a normative data for in general, but for the athlete as well, in terms of where you sit at a specific time. And there's a lot more usability in terms of that. So when I start to go down before I come up, I know where I was relative to before. So if this was here and it was here last time, this is a good place to be, because I know that this last time resulted in this. Now I want it to result in this.
Because if it's a cyclist, a rower, or a mixed martial artist, I guess the athletes have one thing in common, all of them, is that on the day, whenever they compete, whenever something's on the line or in general, they have to be at their best. And then your job is, of course, to look at, the trends of, okay, we were sitting here, then this happened. This time, maybe tweak a few things according to your data and everything that we gathered, so you can actually be at your absolute maximum best. And I guess it's a little, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's a little bit easier with like maybe a cyclist or rower, because they have so many competition or like in volume competing more throughout the year than a professional mixed martial artist. Because like, let's say you fight in UFC, there's a lot of money on the line, financial resources, reputation, marketability, the list goes on and on. So I guess if you are the likes of like Israel Adesanya, when you're fighting for world titles at the biggest stage, you maybe compete like twice a year. So twice a year you want to be at your absolute max. And there's so many different aspects, scenarios that go into getting that athlete to that peak point. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. I think every sport has unique challenges, and it often, when it comes to sport preparation, it comes down to prioritization. So for instance, a lot of sports will have maybe more competitions in the lead up to a pinnacle event. We're not trying to peak for small competitions. So a lot of the times it's being smart about how we manipulate our training load and the qualities that we train in the lead up to a competition, and knowing that, these smaller competitions, they're more treated as training opposed to being treated as competition. Because if I tried to peak for every little event, and this is quite common, this is especially common with combat sports, because there's potentially a lot of events, then I end up spinning my wheels in a way that I either go in a straight line, or, which is also quite common, I start to regress. Because there's a certain amount of time that I need a certain amount of intensity, a certain amount of volume, and a certain amount of training volume. So the distribution of my training needs to be higher in specific areas if I want to make change to them. So when it comes to MMA itself, there's the challenge for MMA opposed to these other sports with more events is MMA may have less competitions, especially at this higher level, but it's very unique in terms of what goes into training. So even though we don't have all the competitions, we've got a lot of training variables we need to manage. And
all periodization is, periodization is the way that we put things together in terms of structure. All that is shifting distribution of training for one, and shifting training targets. So a good example being when I have a fight, my training distribution is very high in fight camp for technical, tactical training, because that is the highest priority at that time. In other trainings, conditioning, strength and conditioning, they work around that. So the distribution is lower. As soon as we move through fight and now we're in the off camp, that training distribution can
now change. I can now shift more of my training volume into my physical training, to my conditioning, into my strength, into my power, because I no longer have the same priority on my technical, tactical training. Of course, those areas are still super important, and they're still probably still top priority, but it's not the same priority as when you're in a fight camp and you're really trying to put everything together. So with that in mind, now there's an opportunity to get better from a physical standpoint. And when we look at the testing, what the primary goal of the testing is to establish, well, in terms of your physical profile, what are you good at, and what are the lowest hanging fruits? As soon as we establish that, we can maximize the training time that we have to get better in these areas to give you the biggest advantage possible with that time. So when you consider just how much variety and variability there is in MMA training, we want to maximize time as much as possible. So when we test, we know exactly what your work-ons are during these time periods that we have more availability. We can put more time into those things, we can accelerate them faster. But even in the times with less availability, and we only have a small amount of training distribution to work with, we can really target those things you need. And it's always going to result in getting more out of the person. And more out of the person, you're getting more on competition day.
I think I teased that earlier a little bit to give a bit more of an overview. So when I met you at Core MMA in Hamilton, you did your degree, you worked for the Pacers, and there's some studies involved, of course. You worked with some local talent, at the gym. Then it was on a national level, like I was saying. Then Australasia, you branched out with Matt the Viper Bayer, for example, to then eventually work now with the City Kickboxing team to be on a global stage. Through all those steps and changing programs and advising people, have you had time to smell the flowers and actually be or did you have a moment where you're holy fuck, I'm doing this, this is what I always wanted to be doing, because now you are not just in strength and conditioning mastermind that works for High Performance New Zealand. You are now, and this is your logo, this is your slogan, you are a combat sport specialist that helps to push and evolve the sport even further. Did you have any moments where wow, I'm doing this is exactly where I want to be?
Yes and no. I remember one time, in UFC Perth, I remember being in the hotel lobby with Dan, Eugene, and a couple of the guys before driving to the fights.
Oh, because you got invited after, the WhatsApp group working with the City Kickboxing team to travel to Australia, Perth, with Israel Adesanya, Eugene Berman and the whole team to be there for fight week, for the camp, and that was the DDP fight, was it?
Yes. Yeah, so there we had Izzy versus DDP, Kai versus Steve Versick, Dan Hooker versus Gamrot.
Free Pete.
It was yeah. It was cool. I think because I've always been you know.
But talk about the moment.
Oh yeah, the moment. Yeah.
In the lobby.
Just prior to jumping in the car to go to the fights, and that was with Dan, and that was probably one moment where I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. But to be honest, I mean, I think for me, I don't necessarily, and have never necessarily done this to, of course, I've had an idea around what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, but I enjoy solving problems and I enjoy the work itself. So I don't necessarily, I don't think that with that in mind, you know, like success is just doing it on a day-to-day basis. So I don't know.
But let's say, you know, when you are, I mean, just, I don't know, like it blows my mind I always have to think back on, you know, when we started working together, $20 cash, you know, like, you're sitting in the car with Dan Hoka, who's top 10 UFC lightweight, Kai Kara France, you know, that was sort of like a title eliminator for him to now, you know, he's about to, on the brink, you know, to fight for the title again. He fought for the interim one in the past, and then, you know, like Israel doesn't need any more, you know, introduction and whatnot, but, you know, just being there with that particular team that is at the, you know, that's the best of the best of the best, you know, like they compete with the best in the world, and you are there to, I don't know, like how was it to put on some of the Venom gear that you get? Because some of the fight kits and whatnot, and then you're like,
it was pretty cool, and I was pretty like fortunate. I was out back for those fights. It was, I think for me, like to be behind the curtain, get a better gauge of how everything runs. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience. And again, like I'm a UFC fan as well, so being there like during some of the interviews, I remember actually probably the first one was being in the room when DC was interviewing Izzy. I was like, oh, this is, because of course I'd watched a lot of those prior, like those same interviews. So that's pretty cool. It was cool. It was cool.
It's pretty cool watching from the sideline, to be honest, as well.
Just different perspective, eh? Like, but I think, like, I don't know, that's nice, but it's not something that I feel the need to do too often, if that makes sense.
It is all good. You do this for your own purpose and for your own sake, and you have your, wherever you want to go with this, you know, but it's just like sometimes, I guess, with the fast pace of life, and this is only in a span of like 2 years, you can forget about just stopping smelling the flowers. Like, what have I done? Like, this is crazy, you know. And I mean, what Tim was saying is we always sitting behind the TV, or, you know, like watching it on our phone, that you are on some of those YouTube embedded, UFC embedded, or whatever. Like, to me, it's like, oh fuck, that's Bill. You know?
Sanya's like having a chat with Goggins, and he's like dropping your name down. And I'm just like swiping, oh Bill.
I thought that was,
I mean,
it was cool.
This is just us looking in from the outside, and I guess being proud of what you've done and who you are now, and it's super inspiring. But just I wanted to see how it is for you, you know, because I know that it's very enticing to, you know, with the workload and putting it all together, and you're so driven and passionate, you know.
I guess like for me, it's been like I've always had this was always what I was going to do for the last decade, and I've spent the last decade, you know, like putting pieces in place, and, you know, like I take my job pretty seriously. So like even now I'm 10 years in, or more than 10 years in. You know, I've been with high performance sport for coming up 8 years. Been working with combat sport athletes for a long time. I'm still trying to do as much as I can to be better, because I'm aware of, I think for me, like maybe where some of the drive comes from is that I see what other people are doing around the world, and, you know, the sport, MMA is such a young sport. It's evolving so fast. Processes are evolving so fast. Everyone's getting so much better. And I'm always, you know, you can be successful today, but it doesn't mean you're going to be successful tomorrow. And, you know, like, I kind of almost think about you're only as good as you are tomorrow anyways, at the end of the day. Yeah. And I feel almost anxious about not being where we need to be. So I want to make sure that we do everything we can today to make sure that things tomorrow are as they should be.
Okay. Maybe let's talk about those trends for a moment, because I mean, to give an example, at some point the contrast therapy came into play, and everyone started doing sauna eyes and like breathing. You know, even though it has probably been around for a wee while, but you know, sometimes you reinvent things. You see, you know, adapt it, I guess, to where we're at in time. Red light therapy, for example, but from a performance point of view, high performance combat sports, is there any trends that you see, or like what is the direction we're taking? I mean, there's a lot of testing now, like within the last year you introduced probably so much stuff to athletes that are already at their peak or thought that they were at their peak, and then you come in and be like, oh, we maybe want to change this, and we have to, you know, incorporate like a traffic light system to make sure we monitor properly testing and whatnot. Like what are the trends and what is the direction we are taking?
I think those are probably good examples to bring up in terms of, I do feel like, you know, we do live in a digital world now where people see other people doing things, and naturally they latch on to, I need to do those things as well. So we do see a lot of, I guess, novel training modalities, recovery modalities, whatever it is. But I do find that we're still missing so much in terms of like the fundamentals, the basic fundamentals of performance. And
which are?
We'll get there. Okay. We'll get there. And those, you know, they're not necessarily the most exciting things to look at or think about, and a lot of them require like time to be successful, and that's, you know, it's not the same as just jumping in a sauna or whatever. I'm not saying those modalities aren't great, but if you're missing the big rocks, they're probably you're missing out on a lot. So the biggest things that I notice is things like training distribution, or training schedules, like not having the ability to optimize certain aspects like recovery, and that's part one. Part two is training schedules that don't gel together well in terms of the pairings of trainings on different days. So I think the biggest thing when we talk about recovery is, you know, having some sort of planned recovery, because when we look at things like ice baths, saunas, those are recovery modalities, but you know, they're very small compared to having a training schedule that is optimized for performance and recovery. That with things like sleep and food are going to be 90%. So this is how we looked at it for City Kickboxing. We looked at micro and macro recovery. So on a weekly basis, how are we building recovery from a micro standpoint into the weekly schedule? From a macro standpoint, how do we build it into like the training blocks? For training blocks, we essentially have a recovery or a deload week every fourth week. So there's 3 weeks, generally if it's a camp, and each phase is 4 weeks. Week 4 is a light week. And all that means is we keep the primary training sessions, because we want to make sure that we don't lose out on stuff that's important, but we reduce the workload by about 50%, and we reduce the intensity by a little bit as well. So that week, maybe instead of sparring twice, they'll spar once. Instead of doing one of the harder conditionings, they might take that off, but they might maintain the technical training, and then there might be some of the harder conditioning work that is priority 1 that stays in. But that's from a macro standpoint. From a micro standpoint, what we look at is undulating intensities throughout the week. So I think let me start that again. I think when you look at your week, you probably want to have 1 rest day, and you probably want to have 1 light day. If you have 1 rest day and 1 light day, that's probably an easy way to have some sort of inbuilt recovery to help manage from week to week. What we really want is we want to have an undulation between, say, like an orange day being a moderate day, a high day being a red day, and then probably being something like your green day, your low day. It's not always possible, but it's something to aim for. But at the very least, if you can keep one day that is smaller, and if you can have one day off, that's just going to help the wheel keep turning. What happens when you don't plan for recovery, and this is what I've experienced, is that athletes end up having recovery forced on them. They either get sick, they get injured, and now they're out of the gym for a few days, or a week, or multiple weeks. So the idea behind structuring and planning recovery is to be proactive about it, because things will catch up. And as well as that, when it comes to how we adapt to training, one of the concepts in sports science is something called the fitness fatigue model. As we train, we get worse, essentially. So as we apply training, we become fatigued, and when we're fatigued, our performance decreases. But that's only a mask. We are only expressing less because of the cloud of fatigue that's over us. As soon as we have recovery, we're able to recover from that and become better, and that's when we go back to above baseline. If you consider if you don't have that recovery, and the recovery is the time period that makes you better, then you're essentially slowly moving down. And if you can stay about where you were, then that's probably the best case scenario in that setting. So I really want to make sure that when we train hard and we're putting in all this effort, we're getting a maximum return from that. So the recovery is what prompts the adaptation. That's one of the big ones. There's more. There's a lot more.
I was about to ask.
There's a lot more.
Recovery is a fundamental that you just described. Is there other ones that play into it? Let's say the main ones that you would look at.
Yeah, well, we can talk about training as well. I mean, if you want to talk about strength and conditioning itself, I think we are in a world where we're looking at people doing all these crazy things on social media, even not crazy things, and a lot of that stuff is, things that are visually appealing, sort of power training, this and that. A lot of it is good, but I think the most important thing behind any of it is everything is context related, in the sense that any particular training is only relevant to the time frame it's performed and the person doing it. So I want to make sure that if we consider steps along the lines of, this is sort of everything being as it should, a lot of the times there are multiple precursors to maximizing this exercise. Maybe we say it's some kind of med ball power exercise. If I don't have the precursors to that, perhaps I don't get a positive return off it. And if I don't get a positive return off it, then it's not a good time. Yeah, it's just not a good use of time. However, doing these lower steps, or the more fundamental work, might get me a very rapid positive return. So a good one is just learning to move your body well. So good movement fundamentals and how we translate that in the gym is basically the precursor to all S&C. If I don't have good movement mechanics and I can't translate that to efficient technique and exercises, then I'm potentially training motor patterns that don't translate to the sport at all. And if that's the case, even if I'm getting stronger, if it doesn't transfer, then there's no point again. So, and that was actually, we had a guy, Rongju, who fought on UFC Sydney. So when Rongju came through, he's been in the UFC for a long time, and very talented fighter. But we noticed that there were some pretty fundamental gaps in terms of his physical qualities. One of those was just his general ability to connect his upper body and lower body. And there were other ones as well. We went through these testing processes, were able to confirm some of that, and that became one of the big emphasis for him through the first probably half of his camp. And I mean, if you saw the fight, I went back and watched this fight prior to that, looked at sort of positions, and it was quite evident the change in terms of how connected he was and how that translated to him being more effective with his own game. And that was, for him, majority, there's always going to be a balance with athletes at that level because you have to balance performance. Mm-hmm. But if you're someone who's an amateur, if you're someone who's just going pro, if you're someone who is just starting their competition journey, then if you have a massive opportunity to develop these fundamental skills that are going to translate far beyond into the future.
Perfect. How about we're going to do that? Because I think, like, for the people watching, there's going to be some pros, there's going to be some amateurs, there's going to be a novice in there that maybe wants to start, like they're maybe good athletically, or they might think they are, but they need some tips, tricks, and we talked about this prior. How about from a fundamental aspect, you can give out for the average Joe who's maybe very athletic, wants to start their journey? Can you give a tip for them for the, let's say, amateur mixed martial artist and pro MMA fighter? Like, what are the things that they can all look at to be successful with where they are on their journey to excel?
Yeah, good question. I think,
Novice first.
Yeah. When we break it down, what do we need to be successful in a sport like MMA? So you can break that down to psychological components, conditioning components, and then, of course, the strength and power components as well, and then the technical components. We talked about training distribution, so then how does training distribution play into that as well? The lower the competition level, the more emphasis on sport-specific there needs to be. So that's going to be something that's quite important, because I'm going to get the biggest gain that I get is going to be from the training distribution that I emphasize the most to begin with. Give me 1 second.
I'll give you a second?
Yeah. Okay. From a psychological component, I don't want to sound like, especially from the start, that we're knocking, the ability to grind and tolerate high training loads. I think that's actually a precursor to being successful. I think every successful fighter that we've had in New Zealand anyways has, really been through the trenches in terms of their ability to push through high levels of training. So I think that the ability to push through training volume, push through physically and mentally, I think that's quite important. So I think as you go from novice and you start to ascend up to pros, you need to have the ability to grind so you can then refine things later and add more of the calculated scientific approach. I don't necessarily think being very calculated and scientific early on, especially as a novice, as an amateur, is a wise move, because I need to have the mental ability to push through things.
Yeah.
But I also need to develop a strong ability to tolerate training load, which is very important, because training load is always going to be high later on. From a fitness perspective, I need to have a good aerobic system. So in terms of the ability to sustain work over time, I really want that from a lower competition level to be as good as possible, because as you become a professional, I want to start to refine that to being very specific, which becomes there's more components of the anaerobic system that need to be placed onto that. But the precursor to all of that is having the right amount of aerobic qualities to start with. So maybe that becomes your long distance running is good when you start. It's not as good when you start to become a professional, but that's still a good place to start. From a gym perspective, you need to be able to move well. You need to be able to move well without weight. So basic fundamental patterns: can you squat well? Can you perform a hinge? What is your single leg balance like? What are your mechanics like? Can you jump well? Can you land well? All of these set the scenes for developing a platform of strength, and then developing power on top of that. Because I need to have all these things. I need to have a baseline of movement, a baseline of strength, baseline of power, so then I can really refine that to being fight specific. From a technical standpoint, I really need all the components of physicality. They come together in the training room. from a sport-specific standpoint. So my ability to refine things like my movement efficiency is really going to be best applied when I have the ability to take that same concept and apply it to the training room. Am I trying to be as detailed? Am I being as focused as I can to build positive movement patterns when it comes to MMA and movement efficiency? I think those things, if as you start to build up, put you in the right place as a pro. And for me, that's probably what I want to see from athletes as they become a pro. And this is pre-transitioning to a UFC time point.
I box this up and I make this very simple for someone who has no clue. For an absolute novice who wants to start, just start getting used to the basics.
Train a lot.
Do like a squat. Learn like a bench press. Do your shadow boxing properly. Get used to the mechanics. If you then move into the amateur, try to make sure you get used to the workload. It's going to increase. You're going to do more technical work. You're going to do more S&C work. You got to do more recovery. And then from what I gathered is what you've been saying is, as a pro, you need to then make sure you do all those things at the right time, at the right intensity and workload and volume. Because you said, you're going to have those dips in there. You peak at some point if you're here, and then, you feel shit here, but then you perform like this, on fight day. So then you can take that data and eventually adjust it so you're actually at your peak. So it's then like making sure you train at the right amounts, specifically at the right times, with all the other components given the technical work that you have to do, the fight IQ that you have to develop and whatnot. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible.
Just to clarify, if your competition level is less than professional, especially if you're a novice just starting, you'll get the most out of sport-specific training. So I think that it's still common for me that I'll see people like take time away from sport-specific training to do more gym work and things like that. You will get the most out of sport-specific training early. So you've got to prioritize, you've got to work around it. It's not until your training age is so high that you don't have the same, the acquisition of skills and refinement starts to slow down, that things like that make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Bill, we went through a lot of stuff already now with, I guess, the pinnacle or where I wanted to get to is to give, the people a little bit of something that they can take away, for, like I said, the novice, the amateur and the pro, which we just summed up. Is there another topic that you would like to bring in now? Is this a good time to touch base on? Or we always give the opportunity, to ask a question back, maybe to just put you at ease, to spit one back. If not, I would just,
No, I'm. That's probably a lot, to be honest. Don't get me started on another.
Okay, no other subject?
Tangent. I'm good.
No question that you want to ask me or the boys?
No, I'm good.
You sure? All right, then I reckon let's cap it here, because that was a lot in volume, quantity and quality. There's a few little. You're an expert, like an hour is not enough, but at least, we wanted to give the people something, that they can then look further into if they want to work with you, if they want to get educated on, the things that you do, if they want to get involved in whatever form or shape, sponsorships, I don't know, just an idea of who you are, what you do within a 2-year gap, I would say, and then we probably talk again in another 2 years and you're working with, who knows what's happening then. Your wardrobe is probably filled with UFC and Venom gear from all those trips that you're taking. On that note, I say thanks to That Media, Timothy Stevens and Ben Anthony Wilson, mixed media artists behind the camera. Thank you boys so much for making this episode possible. Thank you, Bill, for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Always a pleasure to chat.
The last words, if you want to put a plug out there, if you want to give a shout out, whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
This is
awesome.
your moment.
No, cheers.
Mark would be probably a good one to
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I mean, if I start thanking anyone, I've got to thank everyone. So.
Do you think the list would be longer than Triple H's list? You know, when you did his Hall of Fame speech. For the.
They probably have to be similar, to be honest,
Similar,
but depends on how much detail.
It's up to you.
But no, yeah.
Stage is yours.
But no, thanks to you guys. It's good to see you guys. Good to catch up. If you wanted to contact me, Instagram is probably pretty good, smarter_performance. Or if you had any questions around any of this stuff, anything training related, my email is billsmartsc@gmail.com.
We can put that in the description.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
How about any other shout outs, family, friends? Mark? We good?
Yeah, I can't shout one person out. I gotta shout everyone out.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you.
Done.